Imagine you live in a house that's completely surrounded by a dense, just almost impenetrable forest.
Right, like miles and miles of thick woods.
Exactly. Steep ravines, brutal weather, the whole thing. And because that forest is so intimidating, you never bother to install locks on your doors.
You don't buy an alarm system.
Right. You don't even really think about security at all because you assume the geography itself is your defense. Like, why waste money on locks when nature is doing all the heavy lifting for you, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it is a comforting assumption, but it's also a highly dangerous one
Oh, totally.
because it relies entirely on the hope that, no one will ever figure out how to navigate those woods. And if they do, and you have no locks, you are entirely defenseless.
And that brutal realization right there is exactly what we are unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're looking at this massive stack of sources. We've got declassified notes, military history papers, and this really brilliant strategic analysis chapter detailing the implications of the 1962 Sino-India conflict.
It's a heavy topic, but fascinating.
It really is. And our mission for you listening today is to answer one massive overarching question based on these sources, which is how did one single conflict fundamentally transform an entire nation's national security thinking?
Yeah, and we aren't just going to recite dates and troop movements.
No.
This is going to be more of a masterclass in how a national mindset violently shifts from, like, pure idealism to hard realism.
Right. And to frame everything we're going to discuss today, there is a core formula from these strategic papers that I think, you should keep at the forefront of your mind as you're listening.
Well, the deterrence formula.
Yes, exactly. It goes like this. Geography plus capability plus preparedness equals deterrence.
Right. And in 1962, the reliance was almost entirely on that very first variable, geography.
Just hoping the mountains keep people out.
Exactly. There was this genuine belief that the Himalayas were a natural, impenetrable barrier. But the shock of the invasion proved that, geography without prepared capability is not a deterrent at all.
Right. It's simply terrain that the enemy can and will walk right over.
Exactly.
I want to look at this pre-1962 mindset in the notes, actually, because it is fascinating how deeply ingrained this was.
Oh, it was everywhere.
Right. Like, before the conflict, the dominant philosophy driving foreign policy was Nehruvian idealism. I'm looking at this specific term in the research, the Pent-Shale policy.
Yes, the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence.
Yeah. It was essentially an agreement based on that. And the prevailing assumption was Hindi Chini Bye Bye, meaning Indians and Chinese are brothers.
Right.
And because of this deep belief in, third world solidarity against Western imperialism, the sources explicitly note that defense spending was viewed by many writers and politicians at the time as a literal waste of money.
Yeah, just an unproductive drain on scarce resources.
Exactly. But I have to push back here a little bit, just playing devil's advocate for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm reading the economic context of the 1950s in these papers, and wasn't this focus on peace and diplomacy the right moral goal? I mean, for a newly independent nation trying to lift millions of its people out of crushing poverty, prioritizing infrastructure and economic growth over, buying tanks and artillery seems like the right, even noble thing to do.
Oh, I mean, it is absolutely an understandable moral goal. No one faults the desire for peace.
Right.
But the strategic papers really highlight the devastating cost of ignoring reality.
Right, because the reality doesn't care about your ideals.
Exactly. What 1962 proved is that moral politic-like diplomatic goodwill and taking the moral high ground, it just cannot safeguard a country against actual physical aggression.
Yeah.
When the invasion happened, the reality check was horrifying. I mean, we had soldiers in summer uniforms freezing in the Himalayas because the logistics just didn't exist.
Oh, wow. Summer uniforms in minus 30-degree weather.
Yeah. Because they thought the mountain range was this homogeneous wall. But there are passes, there are valleys.
Geography failed as a lock.
Exactly. The reality check was that an active frontier had suddenly emerged. And an active frontier demands immediate infrastructure, surveillance, and physical deployment.
Right, because you cannot negotiate your way out of a physical occupation if you have absolutely no physical leverage to back up your words.
Spot on. And the financial pivot in the aftermath was staggering.
I was just looking at that. The budgetary shift right here in the text. The defense budget jumped from a very nominal 474 crore rupees in 1962 to 1963 to 816 crore rupees the very next year.
It nearly doubled overnight.
That's insane. They even had to birth an entirely new department, right? The Department of Defense Production.
Yes, they did.
But, I mean, doubling a budget doesn't just instantly spawn a modern military. How do you even organize that kind of pivot? Because just throwing money at a disorganized system just gives you a very expensive, disorganized system.
You hit the nail on the head. And that's really where we see the transition from assumption-based planning to capability-based planning.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that. Like, what is the actual difference on the ground between assumption and capability-based planning?
Well, think of it this way. Assumption-based planning is looking at your neighbor and saying, they smile at me every morning, they seem nice, we don't need a fence.
Right.
Capability-based planning is looking at your neighbor and saying, they own a chainsaw, a bulldozer, and 3 aggressive dogs. I don't care how nicely they smile, I need to build a concrete wall capable of withstanding a bulldozer just in case.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense.
And prior to 1962, the planning was incredibly ad hoc. The research papers note that civil-military relations were incredibly strained.
Yeah, I read that. You had the defense minister at the time, Krishna Menon, allegedly just ignoring direct reports from military intelligence regarding Chinese buildups across the border.
Right, because the intelligence didn't fit their assumption that the neighbor was friendly.
Pure confirmation bias.
Exactly. But the 1962 shock shattered that bias entirely.
So what was the fix?
The correction was the implementation of the first ever 5-year defense plan in post-independence India, which covered 1964 to 1969. They finally realized defense potential can't be built in weeks. It requires long-term systematic modernization.
And the scale of this 5-year plan was massive. The documents detail expanding the army to over 825,000 men.
Huge expansion.
Yeah, and a massive modernization of the Air Force to bring in new radars and replace older aircraft, plus a phased program to replace overage Navy ships.
Don't forget the crucial focus on defense production and building border roads.
Right. But as I'm reading this section on capability building, the authors introduced this specific model that totally reframes what a military actually is. They call it comprehensive national power.
Yes. And this is perhaps the most vital lesson from the sources that still applies today.
Okay, let's dig into that.
Defense isn't just troops holding rifles. Comprehensive national power is an ecosystem. The formula is political power plus economic power plus technology plus military plus psychological power, all combined.
Okay, so I get the economic and tech parts. You need roads to move troops. You need the political will to fund the roads.
Right.
But the sources talk about psychological power alongside military power. That feels a bit, I don't know, abstract. How do you quantify psychological power when you're drafting a military strategy?
Well, psychological power is the resilience and the will of the population.
Okay.
If your citizens don't believe in the state, if they panic or if they side with the adversary, your military crumbles. Because your supply lines, your intelligence networks, and your national unity just evaporate.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense.
We'll get into exactly how adversaries attack this psychological pillar later, but for now, understand that 1962 taught planners that you can't just buy guns. You have to build an integrated national engine.
Okay, so they're building this massive engine, building roads, changing the budget, but building thousands of miles of new border roads created a new problem.
It did.
Like, you can move troops faster, sure, but if they are using the old strategy of just standing still in the freezing cold, waiting for an attack, those roads don't solve the core issue.
Precisely. They had to completely change how soldiers fought on the ground.
And this brings us to the tactical evolution, right?
Yes. Prior to the conflict, the mindset was entirely focused on static defense.
Right, just holding the line.
Hold your ground, fight a battle of attrition, and if you lose a hill, launch a frontal counterattack to get it back.
Which, reading these geographical notes, sounds literally suicidal in the Himalayas.
It is. The terrain and extreme altitudes severely limit how many troops you can practically deploy and sustain.
Because of the logistics.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
If you put thousands of troops on a static border in minus 30-degree weather, just feeding them and keeping them warm will defeat your army before the enemy even fires a single shot.
So, reading through this tactical shift from static to active defense, it sounds like transitioning from playing soccer as a heavy, immobile goalie trying to block every single inch of the net to becoming a highly agile sweeper keeper.
I love that analogy.
You don't just stand on the line freezing. You anticipate the attack, move quickly, and intercept the ball before the shot is even taken.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. The military doctrine shifted to what the sources call offensive defense.
Offensive defense. Got it.
You don't just sit and wait. You engage in active defense. The sources specifically mention concepts like quid pro quo or QPQ and riposte counteroffensives.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What is the actual mechanism of a QPQ or a riposte on a battlefield?
Well, quid pro quo literally means something for something.
Right.
So instead of just defending the exact spot the enemy's attacking, which plays right into their hands, you maneuver your forces to threaten a completely different, highly sensitive area of theirs.
Oh, clever. And a riposte.
A riposte is a swift, aggressive counterstrike aimed at making the attacker recoil and prematurely commit their reserves. You're forcing them to fall back to defend their own vulnerabilities.
Taking the initiative away from them.
Exactly.
But to execute that, to be that agile sweeper keeper, you need entirely different gear. You can't be walking heavy artillery up a mountain trail for 3 weeks.
Exactly. And this is where the role of highly mobile reserves comes in. Instead of physically deploying troops on every inch of the border, you identify what military planners call chosen killing grounds.
Like the Kameng sector and Bailey's Trail mentioned in the sources. And for context for you listening, Bailey's Trail isn't some scenic hiking path. It is a brutal, treacherous, high-altitude route that the Chinese People's Liberation Army used to completely outflank Indian positions in 1962.
Right. So today, instead of parking 1,000 freezing soldiers on Bailey's Trail year-round, you place it under intense electronic and physical surveillance.
And wait for them.
When the enemy moves into that choke point, you rapidly deploy your reserves. You use medium-lift helicopters like Chinooks, Mi-26s, Mi-17Vs.
You just airlift everything in.
Yeah, you airlift ultralight howitzers directly into firing positions. You deploy specialized forces like the Arunachal Scouts, who know every rock and crevice of that terrain, to turn the flanks with agility.
Wow. So you are finally using technology and mobility to outmaneuver the geography rather than being a victim of it.
Exactly. It's a total paradigm shift.
This air-land battle concept is fascinating, but as we move toward the modern relevance of these historical lessons, the sources take a really dark turn.
They do.
Because even with helicopters and light artillery, the Himalayas still present massive physical limitations. So what happens when warfare evolves past the physical mountains entirely?
This is where we enter the unseen battlefield. The transformation that started in 1962 is currently culminating in domains that didn't even exist back then.
Right.
Because terrain is still difficult, modern strategy relies heavily on long-range vectors. We're talking about tactical medium-range missiles and multi-barrel rocket launchers.
Which allows you to conduct deep degradation battles, meaning you can strike supply depots and command centers hundreds of miles behind enemy lines without a single soldier having to physically cross a treacherous mountain pass.
Precisely. But this long-range capability directly triggers the next major issue: strategic deterrence and nuclear doctrine.
Yeah. The sources highlight a stark contrast here that requires careful navigation. China professes a minimum deterrence and a no-first-use nuclear policy.
Right.
But, however, they retain doctrinal leeway for what is called launch-on warning.
Yes.
Let's define that, because it's terrifying. Launch-on warning essentially means having your finger hovering right over the launch button.
Yeah.
If your early warning radars detect incoming missiles, you don't wait for them to hit and confirm the damage. You launch your own nuclear weapons before the enemy's weapons even hit your soil.
It is a hair-trigger reality.
Yeah.
And to counter that hair-trigger reality, the strategic papers note that India realized it needs to develop full-spectrum deterrence.
Which means what, exactly?
It means perfectly synergizing your conventional physical military response with your strategic nuclear capabilities.
Yeah.
It requires clearly indicating red lines to the adversary.
Right.
You must communicate.
Mm.
If you cross this specific threshold, the response will be overwhelming.
But here's what I found most striking in these notes. Crossing a red line today might not mean a soldier stepping over a physical border. It might be a line of code.
Absolutely.
The sources stress that operations in the cyber and electronic warfare domains aren't isolated events. Formations today must be prepared to seamlessly switch from a cyber conflict to a physical conflict.
The integration is seamless. Imagine a modern scenario. Before a single soldier moves toward a mountain pass, a massive cyber attack targets the power grids and communication networks of a border sector.
The radars go blind, the radios drop.
Exactly. The physical incursion that follows is merely the second phase of an attack that began entirely in the digital realm.
So your preparation has to bridge the digital and the physical.
It has to.
But there's another unseen battlefield that is heavily emphasized in these sources, and it's something happening right now, constantly, even in so-called peacetime.
Ah, yes.
It goes back to that formula of comprehensive national power we discussed earlier, specifically that psychological pillar, the battle of perceptions.
Information warfare. This is arguably where the fiercest fighting occurs today. The strategic analysis points out that adversaries heavily target border states like Arunachal Pradesh, not just with troops, but with narrative manipulation.
The sources explain exactly how this works, and it's insidious. They exploit entirely civilian domestic issues.
Right.
They look at infrastructure development delays, local employment struggles, or complex tribal status debates. They flood social media and local networks with targeted misinformation to create a perceived sense of severe deprivation among the locals.
Yeah, they try to convince the population that their own government is neglecting or actively discriminating against them.
And why do they do that?
Because if you can make the local population lose faith in the state, your comprehensive national power crumbles from the inside.
Because all the pillars are connected.
Exactly. If the locals in a border state don't support the military, your intelligence dries up, your logistics are hampered, and your political will is fractured. The psychological pillar collapses.
It's an invisible siege.
That's a perfect way to put it. The future lesson outlined in these papers is profound. Information warfare must be fought more fiercely during peace than in actual conflict.
Wow.
By the time the physical shooting starts, if you've already lost the battle of perceptions and the loyalty of the border population, you are at a massive, almost insurmountable disadvantage.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. From soldiers freezing in summer uniforms in 1962, to the mechanics of capability-based planning, all the way to modern cyber attacks and cognitive warfare.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Let's synthesize all of this so the listener has it permanently locked in.
The best way to synthesize this is to view it as a transformation matrix. Let's look at the before. Prior to 1962, the mindset was a complete reliance on natural, geographic barriers and diplomatic idealism.
Right, hoping the forest keeps the burglars away.
Exactly. The problem was being caught completely unprepared by a realistic threat, crippled by assumption-based planning and a lack of infrastructure.
And the correction.
The correction was the massive wake-up call leading to 5-year defense plans, exponentially boosting budgets, shifting to capability-based planning, and adopting an agile offensive-defense doctrine on the ground.
And finally, the current relevance.
Right, it's about moving past the historical psyche of defeat. Today, the lessons of 1962 fuel a confident, proactive stance that integrates long-range missiles, cyber defense, and rapid helicopter mobility, which is exactly what we see at play in modern border standoffs.
So for you listening, here is your rapid revision checklist to take away from this deep dive. Number 1, remember the vital shift from assumption-based planning, which is hoping the enemy is nice, to capability-based planning, which is preparing a defense based on what the enemy actually owns.
Right.
Number 2, remember the absolute necessity of the comprehensive national power model. A strong military is utterly useless without the political will, economic strength, and psychological resilience to back it up.
Crucial.
And finally, the hardest lesson of all true peace requires prepared deterrence.
Idealism tells us how the world should be. Realism prepares us for how the world actually is.
Which brings us to our final thought. Think about the invisible borders in your own world, your career, or your organization. We've seen how warfare shifted from physical mountains to the cyber realm in the battle of perceptions.
Yeah.
Are you only looking out for the obvious, physical threats? If modern conflict is increasingly fought through invisible networks and psychological manipulation, is the next 1962-level shock already happening right under your nose without a single shot being fired?
Think about it.
Until next time, keep questioning the assumptions.